Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. Theresa May does not have her problems to seek building support for her Brexit strategy in the House of Commons. Last week we explained why the unsolved Irish border problem has left her without a majority in the elected chamber for anything resembling her Chequers plan. Today we examine whether Downing Street's position is about to be complicated further by a legal challenge from Scotland and from that traditional enemy of Brexit in the House of Lords. But first, your tweets, your messages and your emails. We hear from Yili, who says, Alex Salmond interviews and analysis are the more serious political and objective insights in the Brexit process. Thank you, Yili. Michael says, the Tories threatened if Scotland voted yes on independence, there would be a hard border between Scotland and England. Yet they're fighting desperately to have no border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Mick says, if Brexiteers are so confident that the UK population is behind them, why are they so afraid of a second referendum on EU membership? Interesting question, Mick. John says, I find it quite humorous that we, Scotland, are chastised for wanting a second referendum, but 3/4 of Conservatives want a second vote on Brexit. Clearly a hot topic this week. James says, the DUP are holding us all to ransom. And John says, this is the best political programme by a mile. Thank you very much, John. Sean goes on to say, Labour don't have a clue what they want. And finally, Sue says, only a general election can solve this situation now. At the end of last month, there was a potentially crucial development in the Brexit drama. The Court of Session in Edinburgh, with no less than the Lord President presiding, referred a case on Article 50 to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. This case was brought by a cross-party group of MEPs, MSPs and one MP to ask for a ruling on whether the infamous Article 50, by which the UK government signalled its withdrawal from the European Union last year, could be reversed. By referring the case to Europe, the Scottish judges opened up the possibility that MPs may, by law, have a new choice on Brexit, to revoke Article 50 and go back to square one. This ruling arrived in the middle of the party conference season and, it is fair to say, was little reported in London news outlets. However, its potential significance is far-reaching. And just in case the Prime Minister was in any doubt, Joanna Cherry of the SNP, the sole MP supporting the case, reminded her of it last week.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's reported today that the Prime Minister wants the meaningful vote to take place on the 27th of November. The 27th of November is the same day as the European Court of Justice will hear the Scottish Court's referral on the question of whether Article 50 can be unilaterally revoked. My question for the Prime Minister is she afraid of MPs knowing the answer to that question before we have the meaningful vote?
First of all, the Honourable Lady is making an assumption about the date of the meaningful vote, and of course we're still in negotiations. And secondly, no, because the point about the Article 50 and whether or not Article 50 can be withdrawn, revoked, is that this government will not be revoking Article 50. We're going to keep Article 50.
But the Prime Minister may not have been as complacent about the Court of Session ruling as she appeared in the Commons. A mere 3 days later, the government lodged a last-minute appeal to try and stop the referral to the European Court of Justice. The government claimed confidence, but that isn't the view of many political and legal observers. One person with a foot in both of these camps is a former Scottish Justice Secretary, Kenny MacAskill. Alex spoke to him from Edinburgh.
Kenny, welcome back to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be back.
Now, this case that's been to the Court of Session and has now been sent to the Luxembourg Court of Justice, this could be a really big deal. Can you explain it to us?
Well, it's almost unprecedented. We've had cases that have been sent by the Scottish Court to Luxembourg for clarification. Minimum unit pricing on alcohol was one, and there's been other things. But I racked my brains, and I can't think of anything that wasn't restricted to the Scottish jurisdiction, and it's something where Scotland's going to be pivotal for the whole of the UK. So it's a fast-track procedure that will clarify the law in Scotland, but the law in Scotland will have application across the whole of the UK.
Now, as I understand it, there's 6 parliamentarians from the European Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, and crucially the Westminster Parliament, and the former Joanna Cherry, the SNP spokesperson, who are taking this case on a cross-party basis. And it's about the irrevocability of Article 50. In plain person's language, it means the MPs could strike it out if the court finds in their favour. What would be the political implications if such a judgment was handed down?
Well, they're huge, because at the present moment we've got Theresa May and indeed her colleagues that are left supporting her saying it's her way Chequers or the highway and no-deal Brexit. This would show that there's an alternative, which is that you could strike both of them down and you could seek to withdraw Article 50 if the court agree with that. So she wouldn't have her own way that it's a bad deal or an even worse deal or with no deal. So it opens up the whole debate for Parliament, and it's of huge significance. Never mind the fact that Scotland doing it probably is, from our perspective, my perspective, schadenfreude. It won't go down well with arch-Brexiteers.
So should we attach significance to the fact that the Court of Session on Appeal, it was the Lord President, Lord Carloway, who's the highest judge in Scotland, he was presiding with other judges who decided to send it to the European Court of Justice. Is that in itself significant?
Oh, I think so. I think the fact that he dealt with it himself shows the gravity that they're viewing it. The fact that they sent it away quite speedily, requesting almost a quick decision, shows that they realise the importance of it. So I think they're perhaps enjoying and relishing the moment, because the Scottish judiciary, often marginalised with regard to a UK Supreme Court, never mind the English courts, is now at centre stage. So they've made it big, they're making it big, and it could be even bigger.
Now, as you remember, last year, the Supreme Court in London ruled that Article 50 at the beginning of last year had to be voted on by the Parliament, and that was seen as a ruling which upheld parliamentary sovereignty over the government. With this ruling, if it came forward from the European Court of Justice and then the Court of Session saying that that could be reversed by Parliament, would that in itself be a further underlining of parliamentary sovereignty?
Oh, absolutely. I think it would dovetail. The Supreme Court laid down that Parliament's got its rights and are protected, and this would show that there's an alternative to the bleak picture being painted by Theresa May, and it would empower Parliament. So at the present moment, the Supreme Court's decided that Parliament has the power. The UK Prime Minister's trying to pretend that there's nothing there to decide other than her options or no deal. If the European Court goes as we hope and expect, then I think Parliament's empowered to be able to not just decide Brexit or no Brexit, but to actually withdraw Article 50.
Currently, Theresa May has been struggling between a backstop and some hard cases in the Democratic Unionist Party and indeed within her own cabinet. But this would open up potentially a whole new dimension come December, come January, when the ultimate votes are due to take place, if MPs at that stage had available to them through the courts, as it were, a get-out-of-jail-free card to say, well, we're just going to decide to rescind Article 50 until an agreement which is acceptable is on the table.
Oh, absolutely. It changes the whole dynamic of being driven down a narrow route where there's only Chequers or no deal. It suddenly empowers Parliament, as was meant by the Supreme Court decision. It means that Labour, SNP, not just the DUP, have control and influence over Theresa May's government for however long it's going to be there.
So looking forward, in terms of the parliamentary mechanics, you would think that most people would be pleased about an opening up of options, but I suspect that some of the political establishments won't see it that way, will they? They'll see it as the European courts intervening in Westminster sovereignty. They'll see it as the Luxembourg court telling people what to do, even if it's only to say you're allowed to do this if you want to do it.
Oh, absolutely. I think the European Reform Group will be choking on their G&Ts. Not only is it their worst nightmare that the European Court that they so despise has delivered it, but it's been brought there by the jocks who they've, never mind English votes for English laws, all of a sudden Scots law is actually going to be able to usurp that and deliver a decision on the floor of the Palace at Westminster. So it is their worst nightmare. It means that there's an alternative option out with the narrow parameters that they've painted, and it does change the whole game for the UK.
So if that ingredient is injected into what is already a fraught and difficult political debate, it means that the outcome of the parliamentary process is even more uncertain. The more options that open up, the more potential conclusions we can have to this long-running saga.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it begins to put the Labour Party on the spot. All of a sudden, they come into play. Not only does Jeremy Corbyn perhaps have to be firmer and more decisive about where he's actually taking the Labour Party, but those recalcitrants like Caroline Flint, who seem to think that they can vote with the Tories against the better interests of their constituents, whatever they voted in the Brexit referendum, are also going to be put on the spot. So it's no longer just the Tory majority propped up by the DUP. All of a sudden, everybody has a vote. The SNP will have a considerable influence, not just because of the Scottish Court's decision, but because of their numbers. And it opens it all up, and it's all there to play for in terms of whether Brexit even happens and whether we can get Article 50 rescinded.
So we could have a situation where it's not just the dreary steeples of Fermanagh and South Tyrone, it's not just the Luxembourg European Court of Justice, it's the Court of Session in Edinburgh who's effectively dictating the future of Britain in Europe.
Well, it'll certainly have been the Trojan horse, which is how I think the Jacob Rees-Moggs of the world will do it. The Scottish Court will have hopefully managed to deliver the opportunity to withdraw Article 50. That then puts alternative options out there. It changes the whole nature of debate. It empowers and opens up Parliament, not just theoretically, as the Supreme Court has said that Parliament should ultimately be sovereign, but they're going to have a choice that is, I think, probably one that the majority of the people of the United Kingdom, not just Scotland, would probably go for, which is let's just call a halt to things at the moment until we see just what the alternative is. It's not what was painted on the red side on the side of a bus 2 years ago. We've got to take stock and consider whether this is wise, whether it's best, and these things can't be rushed.
Kenny MacAskill, as former Scottish Justice Secretary, you're well versed in these matters, but relatively this matter has had very little coverage in the metropolitan media in London. Is that just because it's a Scottish issue, or do you think people haven't woken up as yet to the potential significance of this forthcoming court ruling?
Well, I think it's the latter. I think they've just been ignoring Scotland. It is a backwater. It doesn't matter. Everybody's been focused on Northern Ireland, and all of a sudden, I think they might wake up to discover that actually there was a route into the ECG. It was by the Scottish courts. It doesn't have to defer to the Supreme Court in this. Ultimately, matters could be referred to the Supreme Court, but the ECG has the powers here and been called in by the Scottish courts. So I think the metropolitan focus has been to ignore Scotland. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Well, in fact, it does matter, and it's going to change the nature of the debate and hopefully perhaps even the situation that we're currently facing politically. Now,
Kenny MacAskill, former Justice Secretary and famous football fan, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think is the most likely? Is it going to be Brexit or Scotland's qualification for the forthcoming European Championships?
Well, I think Scotland will qualify. Brexit, I hope, won't happen.
Kenny MacAskill, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Scotland may have added a substantial headache to the Prime Minister's Brexit imbroglio by opening up MPs' options in the House of Commons. However, she may still have something to fear from that other centre of resistance in the upper chamber, the House of Lords. Join us after the break when we'll catch up with Brexit and the Lords. Welcome back. Article 50 may come back to haunt the Prime Minister in the House of Commons. However, its original author sits in the House of Lords, and he is in no doubt that it can be revoked.
My last point is one that I've made before, and I'm afraid I've made it tedious there, but I have to do it again. An Article 50 invocation is not an irrevocable act. Withdrawing the invocation would carry no price, political or financial. We would never have left. The terms of our membership wouldn't have and couldn't be changed without our agreement. If the government can't negotiate a Brexit which even remotely resembles what was promised in June 2016, hypothetical, if they can't, and if the red lines which Mrs May wrote in September 2016 in the party conference speech turn out to preclude any workable solution to the Irish border, hypothetical, then I believe the country should certainly be asked whether, knowing what we now know, they would prefer that the notification should be withdrawn.
I'm now delighted to be joined by one of the most active campaigners in the House of Lords on the Brexit issue, Lord Wigley, the former leader of Plaid Cymru. Dafydd, welcome back to the Alex Salmond.
Thanks very much indeed.
Let me start with this court case coming up at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, which could produce a ruling which says that Article 50 could be revoked unilaterally if the House of Commons and the Lords decided so.
Yeah, well, of course, that's the point, that it could be done unilaterally. I think there's always been a belief that it could be done, although the government tried to prevent that being acceptable. If it can be done unilaterally, it becomes very relevant if the House of Commons, and perhaps the House of Lords as well, fail to support any alternative proposals for Brexit. In those circumstances, we're going to find ourselves running up against a time barrier, the 29th of March. And if there's going to be a referendum, as many of us would like to see, on the outcome, or possibly even a general election, then there has to be a facility for delaying the Article 50 until the outcome of a referendum or a general election are known.
And from the vantage point of the House of Lords, I mean, you must be sitting scratching your head. It seems to be a Commons without a majority for any proposal, if there is a proposal to put to the Commons.
Well, and it reminds us of scenarios which you yourself were part of at one time, when the House of Commons wanted to reform the House of Lords, but couldn't get a majority for any single proposal. It's a similar situation that we're heading for. And it's a matter of frustration in the House of Lords at this point in time, that there's a wish to get on with it, whatever the outcome. Let's make sure that it's a coherent one, try to avoid the cliff edge no deal scenario, but things are bogged down in a quagmire.
Now, I'm going to draw on your experience, long experience as a parliamentarian, somebody who had the occasional clash with the chair in your time as an MP, Dafydd. The government's very anxious, it seems, to try and prevent the Commons opening up the options by an amendable motion. Knowing what you know about the current Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, do you think he'll be giving the Commons a reasonable choice?
I think that John Bercow is certainly his own man. He may have upset some people in the way that he has used his powers, but by and large he is not captive to the establishment. And therefore, if there was a motion arising in the House of Commons to give a greater freedom to the House, perhaps to set standing orders on one side for those purposes, I can well imagine Speaker Bercow being amenable to that sort of way forward.
And as a parliamentarian, surely that is the right thing to do.
Well, the right thing to do is to allow Parliament to consider all the options that deliver the best outcome in what is an immensely serious issue. Now, that we must not allow the rules and regulations and the red tape and the procedures of Parliament to prevent the reaching of the best outcome for the peoples of these islands.
Now, Dafydd, the Plaid Cymru have just elected a new leader,
yes.
Adam Price, who used to sit in the Commons with us both. In fact, if I remember correctly, we were part of the campaign to impeach the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair, about the Iraq War. Adam has come to the leadership of Plaid Cymru as a member of the National Assembly now. How do you see his prospects of lifting Plaid to greater success?
Oh, Adam is an outstanding parliamentarian when he was here and a character in the National Assembly. He has a vision that runs way beyond Wales, and he has an inspiring quality that can boost Plaid Cymru's membership and activism. And I think we're opening a new chapter. Perhaps we might even be following the road that Scotland has shown us.
But as I remember, I think under your leadership, Plaid Cymru outpolled the SNP in 1999. Wasn't that correct?
Well, that was a great election in 1999. If we'd got some 3% more off Labour, we'd have been the largest party.
And do you think Adam Price will be able to make it?
Well, I'm quite certain he has that capability, but even more so that he has the vision to do something with the job when he gets there, and that he can play a role for Wales as you did for Scotland. Now,
Lord Wigley, you're a member of one of the key committees studying Brexit. I know you're limited in what you can say about the evidence that you received in confidence, but generally speaking, I mean, that evidence, does it indicate that some of the warnings that have been freely given and publicly uttered are not exaggerations or doom-mongering, but may well come to pass if there was a no-deal Brexit?
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's the trade subcommittee that I'm on, and we look at matters such as the transport issues, such as how London is going to cope with with Brexit. And the evidence in public session that we've been given has shown quite clearly that people who are at the sharp end just want the detail, they want to get on with it, they don't want the perpetual holding back. And they're getting fairly strident by now about it.
Now, obviously, the House of Lords has plenty of politics played out in it. And, of course, we should remember there's an anti-Brexit majority in the House of Lords. But generally speaking, people would argue that House of Lords committees often go into an element of detail that sometimes the House of Commons misses because the people are too busy scoring political points. Do you think a House of Lords committee has that emphasis?
Yeah, so I think the House of Lords committees can do two things. They have more time to look at some matters that the House of Commons just don't have the time to do so. And they also have a degree of expertise, people whose background were in certain walks of life, industry, commerce and all the rest, that bring that to the table and enable them to ask the right question at the appropriate time.
So the Lords is the watchdog of the Brexit constitution?
Yes, and to feed the information that comes to the Commons so that they can take better decisions.
But you're still in favour of an elected House?
Oh, very much so. I'm a Democrat.
Dafydd Wigley, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lord Wigley is a convinced European. However, how do the crossbenchers in the Lords believe that the Brexit denouement will play out in the upper chamber? Alex spoke to Lord Nazir Ahmed and Baroness Uddin.
Baroness Uddin and Lord Ahmed, delighted to have you on the Alex Salmond show.
Thank you very much, and we are delighted to be on your show.
Lord Ahmed, can I turn to you first? We've been discussing the possibility that the Luxembourg court might rule that Article 50 is revocable, can be reversed. If that were to happen in late November, would that be something you think the House of Lords would treat very seriously as an option?
I definitely do, because I think that the House of Lords, even when the bill came to the House of Lords after the House of Commons, made the current changes that we have. And a lot of the excuses given by the government were that, look, according to the treaty, Article 50, now we are bound to come out in March 2019. And so therefore, I think if the court decides, then obviously there'll be a new debate in the House of Lords, and I think also nationwide.
Would you say that you think the interventions of the House of Lords in passing many amendments to the Brexit legislation were influential in widening the scope of the debate?
I'm not quite sure what the difference was in terms of, I think it's about 1,000 more amendments difference in terms of the scrutiny provided by the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So you can see the breadth of knowledge and thinking and dedication to having a proper, thorough discussion and a meaningful outcome for what has been a constitutional and public mess.
In the House of Lords, you have a very different kind of mentality. Obviously, there are three whips of which are very strong: Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrats. But the crossbenchers and the independents, they go as they wish. And
but Lord Ahmed, I suspect that some of the whips have been sidling up to you and saying, Lord Ahmed, we could appreciate your support in this crucial amendment coming up.
In the House of Commons, they come with the whip and they say, you have to vote. In the House of Lords, they beg and they say, please, can you stay behind? Could you please support us on this particular? So I think the whole thing changes in the House of Lords, and people, when they have their own conscience and belief, and if they've been lobbied, we tend to certainly vote with conscience. And of course I vote with the Labour Party because I was part of the Labour Party. Liberals also ask me, there may be independents or rather crossbenchers who have amendments, and we support them too. But you don't have the same pressure. That's the point I'm making. You don't have the same pressure, because you would have known many colleagues in the Labour Party or Conservatives who would not even know what the amendment is, but they know that they've got to vote yes or no in the lobbies.
Lord Wigley, who I interviewed slightly earlier, made the point that there's an analogy between Reform of the Lords and Brexit. And if you remember, Reform of the Lords had so many options, but not a single one of them could carry a majority. Now we have a Brexit where it's possible there is no majority for any of the options, even if they were to arrive at one.
Yeah.
Can you see the similarity?
Well, we made such burak, as Scottish would say, and a big, big mess, that is, another translation. I don't know. I think that there is no simple solutions either for Brexit now, given what we've done, or the House of Lords reform, although I wait for the day that it is an all-elected House.
If, in a word, you were to look at that crystal ball for the early part of next year, will Brexit happen, yes or no, Baroness Uddin?
No.
Lord Ahmed?
I think if Theresa May gets it her way, she's trying to do that, but I think there are a lot of difficulties so far. So especially this court decision, especially when there are people in both houses who are saying now by January, if she doesn't get this deal, already the Europeans are threatening that they can extend 1 year on with the Irish border situation, but not more.
Lord Ahmed, you've lived up to your reputation of never answering in one word where several eloquent sentences would... Now, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I do have for you both is an Alex Salmond quake, since this is the first time you've been interviewed in the studio.
Okay.
Lord Ahmed, could you pass that to Baroness Uddin?
Thank you.
Now, a quake, as you both know, is a Gaelic, Scots Gaelic for a loving cup. Traditionally, it's Scotch whisky, but Iron Brew is an excellent drink, and it's Scottish, and the quake can accommodate Iron Brew.
And will orange juice persevere the stain?
I love Iron Brew.
Only if it's
I've
Scottish.
never had it, so that's...
Iron Brew's excellent.
Okay.
Pass it round all your friends in the upper chamber.
Yeah, no, we have it. So.
Thank you so much to you both.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex.
Over the last few months, the government have been keen to set the terms of the Brexit debate's final stages, at least in parliamentary terms. They hoped they'd be able to claim Commons assent for the promised meaningful vote on an unamendable take-note motion. Standing in their way is the still formidable presence of the Speaker of the Commons, John Bercow, under fire, but reportedly determined to allow the Commons a proper choice of amendments. And then there is the Upper House. If the Commons were to pass a Brexit plan by a big majority, it is unlikely that the House of Lords would be a decisive spoke in the Prime Minister's wheel. However, Theresa May would settle for a majority of one right now, and the noble Lords might still have a hand to play. Finally, there's just the possibility that a Luxembourg court ruling on Article 50 might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Faced with mounting problems and uncertainty with time running out, it is possible that MPs might, if they're able to vote in that direction, stop the clock on Brexit while they allow the people to decide in a general election or a further referendum. It is said that the last possible date for a meaningful Commons vote is the week beginning the 13th of January 2019. The Romans were told to beware the Ides of March. For Theresa May, the Ides of January may be every bit as dangerous. And so from Tasmina and myself and all at the Alex Salmond Show, it's goodbye for now.